This expedition is going to be kind of like a catalyst. That enormous wealth that the people who were associated with Cortez gain, all the conquistadors and all the colonists want to repeat. But the truth of the matter is that very few people were even able to come close. Many expeditions ended in total failure and ruin or loss of life for the people involved.
These deadly setbacks were a necessary evil of empire building. The firm grip of the conquistadors already keenly felt across Central America. By the early 1520s, the port settlement of Panama City was a crucial transit point for the gold and silver being shipped back to the Old World. It also provided a stable base from which to launch new expeditions.
Establishment of a colony in Panama and the exploration of the Pacific is going to be the way that Spaniards are going to actually get in contact with indigenous societies in South America, in the Andean region, that is going to pique their interest to further explore settlers.
From the humid slums of Panama City, one man was listening carefully for whispers of these exotic golden cities to the south. Francisco.
Stupid idea, look at stupid idea, stupid idea, look at stupid idea, stupid idea, stupid idea， 人就出来，你知道他怎么乱叫 idea 哦？
Francisco
不行的，你那是 stupid idea， 你在这边眼挖地板，真的，刚你那个猪想出来的真的只有
Francisco Pizarro came from very humble origins.
He arrived in 1502 in the Ovando expedition in the same fleet that brought Bartolomé de las Casas to Hispaniola.
He had staged Indian wars in the Caribbean. In Panama in Central America too, where he comes to hold a municipal position in the town council of Panama. So he's very, very experienced.
But Pizarro was engaged in the horribly violent and destructive conquest of indigenous peoples in this area, slaughtering some, enslaving the rest, and through torture forcing to tell them where they had their gold treasures hidden. Would then go to the graves of the ancestors of these people, dig them up, take the gold. Pizarro was himself investigated for being a particularly brutal contributor to this violence.
It's in Panama that the Spanish hear the first faint rumors of a second great empire to the south, associated originally with the name Biru, that then becomes the name Peru. Pizarro, with two key companions, Diego de Almagro and Hernando de Luque, are the first two who think, we should look into this. This is worth pursuing.
Having spent his 20s battling through the Americas as a low-ranking conquistador, Pizarro was finally ready to rise to glory and make his name one which would never be forgotten. Exploration and expansion was surpassed by a feverish gold rush, and Pizarro needed to be in on the action. With Mexico already claimed by Cortez, he would push south, deeper into the unknown than any other European before him, to carve out his own realm. Meanwhile, other conquistadors based across Central America were competing to be first to gain the riches promised in unexplored regions beyond the Yucatan Peninsula. In Mexico City, the brutal Pedro de Alvarado, a rival of Pizarro, led his next expedition. His sights set on Guatemala and its fragmented population of Mayans.
The conquest of Guatemala is fascinating to me, in part because the Spanish protagonist of it is Pedro Alvarado, who was a captain of Cortez's expedition, and then kind of like went on his own to actually do the conquest of Guatemala. So we have a veteran of the previous expedition becoming the leader of the new expedition. You have also the fact that in the conquest of Guatemala, Pedro Alvarado departed from Mexico City, from the Central Valley
became Los Trece de la Fama, the famous 13. After Pizarro's second expedition down the coast in 1526 to 27, when he finally stumbles on the northern Inca town of Tumbes, he now knows that it's true that there is another large indigenous empire or state to the south. He doesn't know about it this time, but he's seen enough to be intrigued. Tumbes is a significant town. He's seen gold and silver treasures there. It's clear that there's
smallpox, perhaps mixed with measles as well. He died, and unfortunately for him and for his dynasty and for the empire, also gave the disease to his heir apparent, leaving the question, who's going to succeed Huayna Capac? Who's going to become the next Inca? A civil war broke out between that of Atahualpa and that of Huascar.
Emerging victorious from that conflict is Atahualpa. He is now the new Inca emperor. And as part of his campaigning in the late stages of the Inca Civil War, he finds himself in one of the major Inca towns on the Inca highway, Cajamarca, in the northern Peruvian highlands.
This tussle for power had thrown the Inca kingdom into disarray, whilst disease tore through the population. A perfect storm brewing. Ideal for Pizarro and his army of conquistadors.
The Spaniards, when they arrived on the coast of Peru in the early 1530s, they encountered an empire in crisis.
Now this is the best news that Pizarro can possibly receive. Instead of encountering a solid empire ruled by an experienced emperor, he finds an empire riven by internal conflict and ruled by a highly inexperienced ruler who's only been Inca emperor for several months.
So it was also an empire that had been pushing its edges. The Cañari, the Chachapoyas, and the Cayambas are three examples of peoples to the north of the empire who were engaged in wars against the conquest by the Inca themselves, who then rapidly allied themselves with the Spanish during the conquest, and that's crucial thing to understand. Different factions of the Inca and the Spaniards themselves mutually trying to manipulate the situation to gain an upper hand.
Pizarro abandoned the smoldering ruins of Tumbes, chopping his way inland through thick jungle, only stopping to establish Peru's first Spanish settlement, San Miguel de Quilo. He soon grew restless, keen to continue on his quest.
So Pizarro and his men undertake the arduous journey on foot and on horseback, following the Inca road system on their journey from the coast up into the highlands.
Pizarro, with less than 200 of his men, arrived at the deserted highland town of Cajamarca on November 15th, 1532. But up above them, in the hills, awaited an incredible military force. The colossal army of the new ruler of the Incas, Atahualpa.
They find the Inca town deserted. Atahualpa and his forces have withdrawn some miles across the valley. But they also find, to their astonishment and to their terror, that he has an army encamped around him that was tens of thousands strong, perhaps as many as 80,000 men. The Spaniards tell us that the Inca tents covered the hillsides like forest. They take possession of the town, they move into its central square, and they spend a miserable, sleepless night. But they're also working out their plan for the following day.
The Spanish soldiers were gripped by fear, the air dense with anxious anticipation of a battle they surely could not win. Pizarro knew that a fight would prove fatal for him and his men. Only his cunning could prevail here.
If they have to fight this vast Inca army on the plains in the valley outside the town, they're doomed. Everything depends on enticing Atahualpa into the town, into Cajamarca, and getting him to come into the square where the Spaniards have laid their trap for him. And on the following day then, the 16th of November, Pizarro sends a series of delegations out to meet Atahualpa, who's taking the waters at some Inca baths 2 or 3 miles across the valley. Towards the end of the evening, the emperor and the forces around him set themselves in motion across the plain towards the town.
Atahualpa's glittering procession was heading straight for
preceded by hundreds of dancers and musicians. There's about 6,000 people in the procession. And eventually, this procession reaches the city and Atahualpa moves into the central square. Now all is set for the Spaniards to spring their trap.
Hidden in the shadows with his 200 men, Pizarro dispatched a priest to great Atahualpa. He would deliver the demands of Catholicism to the Inca king. There would be no negotiation with Spain's one true god, or King Charles of Iberia.
He exhorts him to convert to Christianity, and he hands him a breviary, a book of doctrine. Atahualpa looks at the book, he holds it to his ear as though to listen to what it has to say, and then he casts it on the ground in apparent disgust. And this is the signal. They spring their trap to the Spanish war cry of Santiago and launch a furious assault on the gathered Inca hordes in the tight space of the central square of Cajamarca.
Gunfire stunned the unarmed Inca, their celebratory procession torn apart by Pizarro's cavalry. Spanish steel splitting native flesh, invaders hacking at the flailing limbs of Atahualpa's loyal attendants, who bravely sacrificed their own lives to preserve his. Fear struck at the hearts of the Inca, curdling with confusion and horror at the carnage unfolding around their sacred ruler. Pizarro's instinct had been to devastate his enemy through shock and uncompromising violence. And it worked.
It's a terrible massacre, but the key point is that they must capture Atahualpa alive. Everything hangs on this. This is central to Pizarro's plan. The Incas flood out onto the plain to be pursued by Spaniards on foot and on horseback, slaying as they go. The Spaniards open his ear as though to listen to what it has to say, and then he casts it on the ground in apparent disgust. And this is the signal. They spring their trap to the Spanish war cry of Santiago and launch a furious assault on the gathered Inca hordes in the tight space of the central square of Cajamarca.
Gunfire stunned the unarmed Inca, their celebratory procession torn apart by Pizarro's cavalry. Spanish steel splitting native flesh, invaders hacking at the flailing limbs of Atahualpa's loyal attendants, who bravely sacrificed their own lives to preserve his. Fear struck at the hearts of the Inca, curdling with confusion and horror at the carnage unfolding around their sacred ruler. Pizarro's instinct had been to devastate his enemy through shock and uncompromising violence. And it worked.
It's a terrible massacre, but the key point is that they must capture Atahualpa alive. Everything hangs on this. This is central to Pizarro's plan. The Incas flood out onto the plain to be pursued by Spaniards on foot and on horseback, slaying as they go. The Spaniards only cease the killing with nightfall, and by that point, between 4,000 and 6,000 Incas are dead, including much of the high nobility of the empire, and the emperor himself is a captive. Atahualpa was held captive at Cajamarca for some 9 months. He rapidly came to understand that the Spaniards were obsessed with precious metals. They were obsessed with gold. They were obsessed with silver. And he felt he could use this to his advantage. He raised his arm as high as he could on the wall and said, "I will fill this room once with gold and twice over with silver." But the Spaniards don't believe this can be possible. They think it's bluff. They think it's bluster. Atahualpa sends orders throughout the land that the Inca temples, the Inca palaces should be stripped of their gold and their silver, and that these items should be sent to Cajamarca. And eventually Atahualpa has kept his word. He fills this room once with gold and twice over with silver. This was the largest ransom in history. The gold alone weighed 6 tons, never mind the silver. It was worth hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. 1/5 of that was due to Charles V as his royal right, the royal fifth, but the rest of it was distributed between Pizarro and his men at Cajamarca, fewer than 170 of them, many of whom then passed from poverty to undreamt of riches in a matter of weeks.
The idea was that once the ransom was paid, that the Spanish would go on their way and leave Atahualpa and his allies to their own problems. But that's not what happened. Pizarro decided to execute Atahualpa.
The months dragged on following the massacre, Pizarro's suspicion of Atahualpa becoming ever more intense. Paranoid, the Spaniard dreamed up a series of weak, spurious charges against the Inca.